Just the most epic countdown music, I think. But you know what they should do? StreamYard. If anybody on your product team is watching this, we also need to get StreamYard on the show too.
Yeah.
You need to add customizable uploads for music and countdowns. Like that'd be pretty tight.
I think you can. I'll talk to you after.
Okay. Well, maybe we should look into that. So all that being said, hello everybody. Happy Thursday. Today's Thursday. We're very excited to be with you all. We are missing our third Musketeer, third amigo, because we're going to Mexico next week for our rewards trip, so we can do the amigo thing. But Jake got caught in a meeting, so it's Dan, me, and David this morning. So David, thanks for joining us this morning. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So John goes, "Whoa, a countdown!" Oh,
whoa!
John, you may need to work on those words this morning. So, all right, listen. For those of you who are tuning in this morning, you're like, "Wait a minute, what's Unicorn Finders? Like, what is this thing?" There's a unicorn and it's purple. And here's the deal. So basically, when COVID hit, March 2020, Dan, Jake, and I. Jake is not here. We are very good friends. We started to hang out on my podcast. We did a few things. We're like, well, why don't we just start something to where we all hung out every week, and we brought in our connections. So Dan, Jake, and I'll let Dan introduce himself real quick to you all. But basically, I've been recruiting for 10 years. Dan's been doing it for really as well. And then Jake, about the same. So like we got 30 years of experience. We know a lot of people. So let's bring people on to the show where we all hang out together. It's kind of morphed into now we are actually focusing specifically on startups, unicorns, right? People in the tech space who are doing really cool stuff. And I had the pleasure of meeting David on my show and podcast, Guidance Counselor 2.0, and his product's really cool. So we're going to talk about it. But before we dive in, Dan, give a quick background for people who are watching.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure to be back again. And David, it's a pleasure to meet you. David and I were chatting right before we got started, found out that we grew up about 10 minutes away from each other in sunny South Florida. So always great to find another friend that grew up close. But no, my name's Dan. As you guys know, I run our Tampa technology practice down here for Vaco. I'm super excited. The weather's beautiful. It's perfect Florida weather, you know?
I love it. We're supposed to get snow again this weekend. We got 6 inches last week, and now we're gonna potentially get more snow this week. So I'm not gonna
lie, Taylor. It's been about 50 years or 40 some odd years since we got snow here in Tampa. So
the fact that it even has snowed in Florida, period, is like crazy to think about. But this is not a weather podcast. So all that being said, David, give the people what they want. Who are you? You know, what do you do? And then we'll kind of more dive into your product.
Hey, sure. Yeah, I'm David Khourshid. I'm at David KPN. I'm pretty much everywhere online, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever. And so as the name suggests, I played piano for like a long time, but I'm also a developer. I've been a developer for about 10 or 11 years. I just came from Microsoft. I was at Microsoft for 4 years, and then I decided to do my own thing. So working at Microsoft, you have to wear so many hats. So I've touched front end, back end, infrastructure, just everything. And so now I'm just really excited to be doing my own thing. So
I love
that's
it.
a very brief background.
Very brief. We like it. We like it. So David, first question for you, man. Talk about what your product is.
Sure. So first of all, I want to talk about exactly what it solves. And I worked in many startups and, of course, big companies like Microsoft. And there's just this lack of communication between different parts of the team, developers, designers, and stakeholders. And that's because the software we write becomes so complex that it's hard to determine like what the features are, what the use cases are, what things are going to break, do the features, and does the software actually match the design? And just communicating between like those three types of people: developers, designers, and stakeholders. And so we have documentation, we have diagrams that we could write, we have tests that we can make to make our software more robust and understandable. However, those go out of sync really fast. Ask any developer and they're going to agree with you if their code is lucky enough to have these kinds of things at all. And so what Stately is trying to do is make visual tools for developers, designers, stakeholders, basically the entire team, for them to collaborate on complex application logic. And so the underlying technology behind this is what's known as a state machine. And so state machines have been used in software. I mean, software is not possible without state machines. Neither is electrons. It's really, really old technology. And state machines are pretty much everywhere in software. So we're just creating tools to help the entire team collaborate on them, just visualize them in your application and see how it can make your code a lot more robust, and to automate collaboration and documentation and test generation, for the entire team.
So David, I've got a question. Obviously, you and I could talk for hours, maybe even days about state machines. But let's consider that there's maybe somebody on the podcast or that's listening that doesn't know what a state machine is. What is that? And how does your product or your solution help make that a little bit more deliverable to the average business user?
Yeah, so state machines are actually a lot simpler than they sound. It's not like.
Thank you for asking that, Dan. I have no idea what a state machine.
No, it's a really great and essential question. And honestly, anyone can understand it, not just developers. But state machines are basically boxes and arrows where you could only be in one box at a time. And so when something happens, you follow an arrow and you're in a different box. That sounds really abstract. So to make a really simple example, take humans, for instance. We're either asleep or awake, right? We can't be both asleep and awake at the same time. Otherwise, go see a doctor, please. But you transition from the asleep state to the awake state when something like an alarm goes off, right? So that alarm going off is an event that makes you transition. And so the way that you behave when you're in the asleep state is different than you behave in the awake state. So that is just a really simple state machine right there. You have two states, asleep or awake. You have transitions that go between those states. And funny enough, this simple mathematical formalism describes how virtually all software works. If you've ever interacted with a multi-step form, if you ever had to do some sort of automated workflow on the back end, if you've ever played with Zapier or if this then that, those are just state machines. Those can be described by the same mathematical principles that is used in pretty much all technology.
So I want to talk about that real quick, right? For the people who are watching us are like, oh, low code. And then I think Dan off air was like, then there's lower code and then there's no code. So real quick, for the people who are watching, I asked this question before we went live. So no code solution is like a Squarespace or Webflow, right? So very, very little or no code, right? Basically, it just stands it up and you get after it. So you said Stately is a low code, right? So essentially, there is still some coding that needs to be done within Stately?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And so when you consider low code with developers, low code is not just like a fancy visual environments for for doing simple tasks. It's more like low code is the code that you don't have to write. And so developers, we actually really embrace low code in the technical sense, but not really so much in the traditional sense of dragging and dropping things. You're not going to see developers using drag and drop editors or things like Squarespace or Wix or Webflow too much. They really want to get down and dirty into the code. However, the less code that the developers can write, the better. And so that's one of the big differences is that this is really low code for developers, or at least developer first.
I love that. So
David, I want to ask you. So we've seen a rise of. I'm not even going to talk about no code, but of lower code and low code products over the last 5 years. Obviously, they've been around longer and everything else. What was it about kind of a hole in the market that you saw that made you want to create an additional product and not just latch on to a Zapier or whatnot?
Well, I actually took a different approach than the companies that you've mentioned, and it actually came to me by surprise. So I was working on this open source project called XState for actually the last 6 years, and this is primarily, as open source goes, it's a developer first tool for allowing developers to create this complex
and what's it called
logic.
One more time?
XState, like the letter X and then state. And that's one word. So don't do like X dash state or anything. I've seen many people do that. But anyway, so XState is primarily for developers wanting to create complex logic in a way that can be visualized and more robust. And so at first it was just a fun project for me, but then a lot of companies started using it. Even Microsoft themselves, AWS is using it for their Amplify authentication stuff. There's a whole ton of companies that I'm not going to list right now, but I realized that, okay, this thing is getting really popular, and I had to work nights and weekends on this open source project, and I've had a few collaborators which have been extremely helpful. But then, I had a couple of investors actually message me and say, hey, you should really consider making this into an actual product. So that's when I started thinking, like, how can I really turn this into a product? It's open source, it's free. And then I realized that there's a lot of tools on the market that are sort of doing a lesser version, a less complex version of what we're doing. And so the reason for it is because the majority of low code products today are focused on non-developers or so-called citizen developers, people who don't want to learn a full-fledged programming language and they just want to make stuff. And what I realized is that developers are sort of the same way. It's not that we don't want to program, but we just want to make stuff. We don't want to, have to think about the edge cases and the logic and like do all that coding. So that's when I figured, like, hey, we could make tools and services for developers and for collaboration with developers, designers, and stakeholders that could be really useful to the entire team, and basically provide the benefits that we're already providing with XState, but in a productized form.
So you mentioned something about talking to investors, and I want to dive into that, right? So we talked about kind of the nuts and bolts. I want to talk about your story a little bit and talking to investors. So there's going to be people that watch this now or in the future that may have an idea, and they're like, I don't know anything about investors or talking, networking, all that stuff. Talk about your journey with that, because I think your journey is kind of like what I just said, like you didn't have much experience. So can you dive into that and talk about your journey with talking to investors and getting that funding?
Yeah. So for the longest time, I actually, just really wanted to start a company, but that seemed like a monumental cliff to climb because I didn't know the first thing about like just, quitting my job and starting a company. It just seems really fearful. Like, you have a salary and then all of a sudden you don't. It's like, okay, how are you going to make money? So a lot of people, I guess, save and bootstrap and all of that. But like I said, I was working on this open source project, nights and weekends. I got some funding from GitHub sponsors, which, I mean, I'm really thankful for that, but it's like, a few $100s a month. It's you cannot live off of that. So I was actually contacted by an investor, I think about like a year and a half ago, about like, hey, you should turn this into a product. And then that's what really forced me to dive into the deep end and start researching, what this is all about. It's not just like talk to the investor, pitch them, they say yes, they give you money. It's a lot more complicated than that. But so the first thing I did was actually talk to other founders and people who have, started their own companies and just ask them for advice. And so that's why I think that having a network is probably of paramount importance here, because you want to have a lot of people that you could talk to, and you want to have people too who are like, hey, I could introduce you to my investors and we could see, whether both of your goals align and your values. So yeah, I think network is definitely most important.
So David, I want to ask you, so obviously you were able to talk to an investor, you're able to get some money. But yeah, one of the things I want to talk to you about is you mentioned, your network and what you learned from other founders. What did you learn? And then how did you, or I guess, what are some of the pieces of advice that maybe you didn't know going into starting a business, but more importantly, how did you then parlay that into building beyond just a product, but actually building a business with your investment?
So like I told you that, network is, one of the most important things, but so is community. And this sort of segues into your question, but I think that like in the past, first to market was most important, but now it's really first to community. Like you could definitely be first to market, but that doesn't matter if there's someone else with a huge community behind it. So, for the last 5 or so years, I've been building up like just the XState community and people using XState and contributing ideas and asking questions and just building really, really cool stuff with it. And so that's what's like really valuable to investors. I will say that the first investor I talked to actually did reject me. So that was sort of a hard lesson to learn.
Yeah.
So talking to other founders and stuff, they told me like, here's what to avoid. Here's what's to look for. Here's how to structure your pitch deck. But I think one of the most important things is just having a crystal clear like vision of what the product is, and how it's going to eventually make money. Because at the end of the day, that's what investors really want to see.
What's the major suggestion you have from a pitch perspective? I know you had clear defined product, but like, is there any other like no-nos or people should stay away from when trying to pitch their product to investors?
I would say just again being ambiguous about like I actually saw a bunch of pitch decks from friends where it's like they have a really, really good project, whether it's open source or just something that's really popular, but there's no clear vision to like, all right, how is this actually going to make money in the future? And so you can't really sell investors on, hey, we're popular, because there's tons of tools that are popular, but there's zero way for those tools to make money. So yeah, I would say that, and avoid taking like the very first or second deal that you're presented to. I've been told by advisors, like, even if someone says like, here's like a few $1 million, like shop around, because you don't want to, you want to be with investors who really value, your vision and aren't just looking to, cash out or something like that. Because I've discovered that investors are more than just money. They're people who you need to talk to, you need to bounce ideas off of, and you need to get advice from as well. And so they need to also be mentors to you.
Interesting. So from running a business, right? So you took an idea. So basically your journey, your product journey, right, was at Microsoft, contributing to this XState this open source community, started to build up, connections community. Then you went to left Microsoft, started this idea, pitched to investors. Talk about then now, or so now it's like trying to bring people around you. So it's like who was your first hire, right? Because so I'm interested in that. Like, who did you decide? Like, what position did you decide to hire first, and why?
Well, as this is primarily a developer-focused product, we had to, just hire developers for this. So I actually hired 3 people pretty much at the same time, and by hired, I mean, like, we were talking about this for a while. We had like a private Discord chat where I was like, hey, I'm trying to raise funding right now to pay you all, and let's just talk about like the future ideas that we want. And so these are 3 people who have actually been in the community for a while and have been, contributing heavily to the open source project, and who are just really, really good engineers. So yeah, we just had a very strong technical team. And then after that, I realized, okay, now I need to actually hire people for developer advocacy, and especially things like administration and office management, just because I realized that I was spending half of my time doing all of that, like payroll and contracts and stuff like that. So it was actually a godsend to have someone taking care of those responsibilities.
For sure.
So where do you guys go from here? Now you're like, we're talking about building a business. You've moved on from just a product into building a full-fledged, company. How do you guys grow? How do you guys iterate? Like, where do you guys go from here? And how do you guys ultimately come up with your vision, being that you guys are still relatively young, still growing, and there's obviously a lot of different directions you guys can go?
Well, so my personal philosophy on this is talk to users. So obviously you need like a 10-year goal, but that really has to be like a North Star goal, not a single track vision. And so by talking to our users, we start to discover a lot of emergent use cases. And so I mentioned that the underlying technology behind this is state machines. And so when I first created XState, I saw people using it in the front end, but then we started seeing people use it for serverless workflows and even chatbots, smart contracts, things like that. And so that is sort of like, we have the same Northern Star of improving collaboration between the entire team. But now we're seeing like, okay, there's a lot of different products and features that could come from just talking to users. And so I think one of our biggest goals is growing the community. And so we have to grow our team and hire more people in order to help do that, because it can't just be, me and one other person writing blog posts and reaching out and everything. Right. There's only so many hours in the day.
Yeah.
And so that's really how we grow.
So any exciting things you guys have on the horizon? Any new releases or anything like that?
Yeah. So by the end of the month, we are going to be releasing the open beta of our visual editor, which is that, collaborative design / development tool. I don't know what you want to call it, just because it really encompasses like a combination of things where it's not just like your, Lucid charts or draw.io where you draw pretty diagrams. It's like the diagrams that you make are actually usable. They're code. You could export them as code. You could, just simulate them and validate them and everything. But yeah, we're working on the editor and, just working on making it become a full-fledged design, development, and collaboration tool with important features for the entire team. And we're also working on expanding our open source offerings, because open source is important. You can't charge for everything, and open source is great for building the community and providing more value to people who do use our services and tools.
So you keep, I guess I have two questions. One, you keep talking about community and why it's so important. And I feel like not many, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong. I just don't talk to a lot of startups and companies in general that talk about community a lot. And so where does this community, I guess, passion come from?
So what I've seen, the community passion comes from basically just seeing all the possibilities that, we've been working on, like with state machines, the realization that you could use state machines for so many different things. But it's not just the technology, it's really the people. Our entire team have been just so hyper-focused on being there for our users. And it's helpful that we're in different time zones, because whenever anyone asks for help in our Discord channel, someone's going to be there just helping them out. Right. And so that kind of thing is really valuable to developers and companies who are like, we're considering using the software, but we need to make sure that we have the supports, when we could get it. So yeah, we've just been really, really, passionate with with helping out our users. And also the nature of the technology we use means that there's no like disagreements or anything. There's, people aren't like, hey, it should have been this way or that way. We're like, no, this is a formalism. Like this is something that has been established decades ago, and it's not changing or going anywhere. And so that gives a lot of people ease of mind too.
Is that how you guys have grown, as a company as well, and how you guys have attracted new, companies and new users? Is that, this is a formalized product. It's not so much me selling you on, the idea as much as it's selling you on, here's a solution to what's a problem that you're already facing.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I forgot the question.
No. I mean, I don't know if there's so much of a question as much as I was like, yeah, I just want to make sure that I'm hearing you right. But I guess from there is, how do you guys grow? I mean, have you guys grown pretty organically, just through word of mouth, or do you have sales folks? I mean, obviously you have the community aspect of it, but how are you growing and getting your product name out there more?
I mean, it's been pretty organic. Back before COVID, I used to just go to lots of conferences and give talks about just the ideas, behind state machines, XState, and all of that. And, right now we have to basically do all of that virtually. But yeah, we don't have salespeople yet. And honestly, I think that word of mouth is a lot more valuable than just trying to hire salespeople, because salespeople in marketing, that's sort of like brute forcing it, eventually will grow to where we need that. But if you, and by you, I mean anyone who wants to start their own company, if you can do it organically, just focus on that, because that's going to be validation that your idea is worth spreading. I mean, you could force it down people's throats, but it doesn't validate it at all.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I think that's another conversation with DevRel and developer advocates and creating content for companies. I think have really been a focus in the tech space in the last year and a half, 2 years because of COVID, right? You can't go to meetups, you can't go to conferences. And so the best way to get your product information out there organically is to hire tech people who like to run their mouths and create content and then share obviously your all your secrets. So the last question I want to ask as we wrap up here, David, how do people, and this is just really for me, how do people integrate your software with their current offerings, right? So if a company's watched this, they're like, I like the sound of this, what problem do I have to have in my organization or problem in my code or whatever to call you and Stately? Where is the disconnect to leverage your software within organizations?
Right. So the simple entryway question is, do you understand all the features in your application? I mean, that's really important for communicating to users. Just what can your application do? What are the different, just states of it? And the answer is, sometimes yes, it's like, oh, I guess we could search the code base or look through some user stories, and hopefully those user stories aren't out of date. But then they quickly realize, okay, we need a better way of just, having a single source for just what our application can do, how it works and everything, and just being able to communicate that with developers, designers, and stakeholders without that information going out of date. So I guess the entry point is, if the answer to that question is no, not really, we need something more robust, then Stately can be used, or at least will be able to be used in the future, for being able to organize all that information in a way that syncs with the actual implementation, which means it's not going to go out of date. It's not going to be a diagram that you create that, the developer changes something and then, the diagram is worthless. It's going to be something that lives with your code and changes over time, and becomes a really powerful knowledge source for your entire team. So
basically your product is like a big hug is what that is. It's basically just it's just kind of wrapping your arms around.
Right. Yeah. Whether you use it for the actual implementation, which is the developer side, or for describing, the flow of the application, which is the design side, or for even listing out user features, which is the stakeholder side, or for testing analytics, we have a lot of things planned. So whatever stage you're at with creating your app, whether it's greenfield or an existing legacy app, you're going to find our stuff useful.
That's cool. There you go. Well, that's awesome. Dan, any more questions for you?
No, I mean, that's great. That's a really cool product. And I know that you're in a really great ecosystem there in Orlando. As somebody that was involved in the startup scene there in Orlando, you've got a great group of people around you. You've got a lot of great, incubators and thought leaders and everything else. So I'm glad to see that it's still thriving and doing well. And I'm glad that you're a part of it, man. It seems like you've not only got a great product, but a product that can make sense at any company. I mean, there's thousands of use cases that I'm sure exist out there. So, man, rooting for you and excited for your continued success.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate
it. So y'all, again, thank you for hanging out with us this morning, Unicorn Finders. Keep it short and simple, 30 minutes this morning. If you want to connect with David, what's your Twitter handle again?
It is David K. Piano.
Cool. And then obviously I threw up the website. Ryan's over here saying, sounds awesome as a low code fan. Looking forward to seeing where this goes. I love it. We're already creating fans in this. I love that so much. So y'all have a great one. Next week, do we have a guest next week? I think we do. We do. So next week, we are having a really cool company, Therify, on, and they're based in Nashville. They're doing some cool stuff. So again, I'll share all the information. So David, thank you for coming on, hanging out with us today. And y'all have a great Thursday, and we'll see y'all next week.
See you guys. Thank you.